Starmer has his mind on other things right now.
The whole defence, security, trade, the global insecurity that we've seen, all of those is a major, I was going to say distraction, but it's not a distraction, it's an imperative. But it does mean his attention has been elsewhere. I think he now needs to come back from Holland tomorrow and be absolutely clear and focused on this.
Donald Trump says the FBI is going to investigate a leaked US intelligence report suggesting American attacks on nuclear facilities in Iran did limited damage. The US president called the report fake. His Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth had this message to people questioning the attack's success.
You better get a big shovel and go really deep, because Iran's nuclear program is obliterated. Those that dropped the bombs precisely in the right place know exactly what happened when that exploded. And you know who else knows? Iran.
The Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer's confirmed Britain will raise defence and security spending to 5% of GDP by 2035. NATO allies also agreed to spend more on their collective defence. And Gareth Southgate's received his knighthood at Windsor Castle. The former England manager led his country to consecutive European Championship finals in 2020 and 2024. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed down 40 points at 87.18. The pound buys $1.36 and €1.17. LBC weather: showers spreading into western areas this evening. Dry elsewhere, but feeling warm and humid, a low of 13 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. This is Cross Question.
And I'm Simon Marks, in for Ian Dale, and once again helming Cross Question tonight. We do this every Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday on Ian's programme. You can ask any question you like to our panellists over the next hour. And joining me around the table tonight, John Pearce, the Labour Member of Parliament for High Peak in the Peak District. Andrew Rosindell is the Conservative MP for Romford in Essex. Zoe Garbett is a Green Party member of the London Assembly and was the party's candidate for mayor at the last election. And Phoebe Arslanagić-Little is a political commentator who heads social policy for the Right of Centre Onward think tank. You can lead Britain's conversation in the next hour with any question that is on your mind. Maybe you want to ask about the growing Labour revolt to the Prime Minister's plans to reform disability welfare benefits, or you might have questions about the pledge he made today to devote 5% of GDP to defence expenditure by 2035. Perhaps you've got questions about the future of the Middle East amid those intelligence reports suggesting that President Trump did not succeed in eliminating Iran's nuclear program entirely. Or you might want to ask about Glastonbury's decision to ignore Sir Keir Starmer's appeal to deny Kneecap a gig at the festival. Alternatively, send us an idea for the fun question of the night that I'll put to the panel at the end of the hour. On Cross Question, it is your question that sets the agenda. And if you fancy watching us instead of just listening, you can find us in glorious Technicolor now, live on the LBC app.
Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Cross Question. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app. This is LBC.
And our first question of the night comes by telephone. Kenneth has called 0345 6060 973 from Dundee. Good evening, Kenneth. What would you like to ask the panel?
Good evening. It's about one specific aspect of the justification for the cuts in benefit, and that's that Liz Kendall and a lot of other people who I've heard justifying the cuts is that the current system traps people on benefits. I wonder if the panel know how the system works, the system designed entirely by Ian Duncan Smith, George Osborne, David Cameron. For disability benefit that's got nothing to do with your ability to work. UC specifically encourages disabled people to work. It's designed to allow you into work, even though you're disabled. You will not lose your benefit. If you're found unfit for work, you're actually encouraged into work. That was a big change from the old system.
Kenneth, what's the question?
The question is, do the panel agree or understand that the current system does not trap people on benefits? It's designed by Ian Duncan Smith to do the exact opposite.
John Pearce, Labour MP for High Peak in the Peak District. Do you agree with Kenneth, who is rejecting the Prime Minister's claim that people are trapped by this system?
Look, we inherited a system that is clearly broken. I completely understand what Kenneth is saying in terms of universal credit. But the reality is you are seeing lots and lots of people who are claiming benefits who feel that the system isn't working for them, that they're not able to try work without the risk of losing their benefits. We're seeing huge amounts of increase in the number of people who are claiming PIP, for example. We're looking at 1,000 a day are being awarded PIP. That's the size of Leicester each year who are moving on to PIP. That is unsustainable, and the whole system does need review. And so Kenneth is right in the fact that the system does need root and branch reviewing. We need to make sure that job centres are working better for people, that the whole system of how people are assessed, and we want to move to more face-to-face interviews so that people are getting the right support at the right time. So yes, fundamental change is needed, and that's why the Prime Minister is bringing forward these changes, and that's why they're so important.
But what about this issue of the claim that people are getting trapped into a lifetime on disability benefits that are preventing them from going out and getting work? We've been, in the last hour, previous nights on LBC, awash with callers who receive those benefits who insist that is not the case. Why do you're supporting the Prime Minister's proposals. Why do you think it is?
Well, as I say, I think the thing is that lots of people go through the benefit system, and there is a disincentive then for them to try work because they fear that they're going to go back to the start of the process. They're incentivised to try and get to the highest level of benefit because of the fear of losing it. And that's how people are getting trapped in. What these reforms will do is to give much more tailored support to people. That one-to-one support is absolutely vital. Changing the way job centres work. We're going to redeploy 1,000 of the work coaches to give personalised support to disabled people. These reforms are absolutely vital because the best way of improving people's lives. Look, we're the Labour Party. We believe that there's a floor through which you should be protected from falling, but you also then need the incentives and the safety of going to work. We're improving work through the Employment Rights Bill. Work is fundamental to the Labour Party, and the way that we've always approached it is that's how people achieve the best in life, and we want to support anyone that can work and wants to work. We want to make sure that they can.
Zoe Garbett.
John, you just mentioned you're going to do a root and branch review, but it feels like you're just cutting the tree down. I think this is a really brutal way to go about reviewing a policy. If you talk to disabled people, they're not having a great time. I've chaired a couple of panels in the past couple of days around affordable and accessible housing and access to services, but I don't think this is the way you do it. There's loads of reports that say that people are going to be pushed into poverty. People might die because of the result of these changes. That's people, health experts, as well as families from people who died from the last round of changes. And I just think it's really quite worrying for disabled people.
I mean, can I just say, I think it's really important that we don't worry people unnecessarily about these changes. The 9 out of 10 current claimants will still be in receipt at the end of this Parliament. Now, that's really important for people to understand, because I don't want people listening to this show to be sat there worrying that they're going to lose their benefits. And no one will lose it without a proper assessment of their needs. And and then there's a 13-week period then for them to move off the benefit if they were found to have done so. So, look, these changes are necessary. And can I make one final point, which is this isn't about cutting the overall budget. We're increasing it. By the end of the Parliament, we'll be spending $8 billion more a year than we are now. So this is not a cut. But
it's going to be a £5 billion cut now for the people that are currently on these welfare supports, and I just think it's going to be catastrophic. And it's not just alarming people. These are stories from people who the people that need support to get dressed, need support to go to the toilet, being told that they should be able to go into work. And I think it is alarming people. And that analysis from health professionals and, people's family members are saying that it's going to be really difficult. And it's just not where we should be. If it's about efficiencies or making savings, it's not the people that should be carrying that burden.
Well, sorry, can I just come back on that? This isn't about making efficiencies. This isn't about savings. This is about reforming the system to support people better. And I do think it's really important that we don't worry people. These changes wouldn't come in until November 26. As I say, no one's going to lose their benefit without a proper assessment.
But it's making those changes with people, isn't it? You need to, if there's over 100 MPs that are really worried about this. I was saying earlier I worked in the NHS, and one of the base levels of should you decide to do something or not, if there's a lot of evidence saying it's going to be detrimental to people's lives, you need to review and co-produce that with the people who are most impacted. And if they're worried, it's those people we need to listen to.
Look, absolutely. We should be listening, and we are listening. And I completely understand why many of my colleagues want reassurances and are asking the government to look and to explain more. I absolutely understand that. But fundamentally, the system needs to be reformed. And if we don't do that, then we won't see the extra £1 billion that we're putting into employment support. We won't see the without losing your benefits changes that we're intending to bring in. Like all of these important changes that are part of this bill will be lost if we don't move forward. And so it's absolutely vital that the system is reformed.
Andrew Rosindell.
So I disagree with what's been said, because I think we should cut the amount we're spending on welfare in this country. It is simply unsustainable. So I'm disappointed that the government aren't actually going further. What we should be doing is reforming the welfare system completely to encourage as many people as possible to get back to work. We cannot sustain a situation whereby so many people are now living off benefits. The country cannot afford that. So we need to be radical. However, we need to be fair to those who are genuinely in need of that support. There are disabled people, there are people on long-term sickness, and the system, whatever system it is, whether it's designed by the previous government or this government or a future government, it should be aimed at helping those who genuinely really do need that support, rather than a system that people can benefit from by claiming they've got an issue and the system being too generous, because we haven't got the money. It's as simple as that. The country is pretty much bankrupt. So we can talk as much as we like.
We're going after the wrong people then.
Well, maybe. And then you can ask the Labour government about that. They've got to decide these things because they're now in power. I'm not saying we got everything right at all. But what I do know is that the whole argument needs to be shifted to how do we get people back to work, how do we reduce the welfare state, and how can we live within our means again?
I really reject...
Let me get to Phoebe. Phoebe Arslanagić-Little.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think this is fascinating because I think a lot of the problem here gets to why it's so difficult to design a social security system well, because the way that the incentives actually mesh up and line together. So between 2019 and 2024, spending on age-related health work benefits has gone up by £12 billion, right? And that's not because the benefits become more generous. That's because there are so many extra claimants. Analysis increasingly suggests now that's because the worklessness benefits have become less generous. People have migrated over to health-related benefits. And that shows you when those cuts were made to worklessness benefits to try and get more people back into work, it wasn't predicted necessarily, or at least I assume that the politicians who implemented those didn't predict that all those people would just switch over to health. And that's why we've seen that spend really, really go up. And that shows, I think, just how complicated reform is in this area.
OK, well, we are going to talk more about reform in this area in a moment. There's plenty of time for you to put your questions to the panel. You can call 0345 6060 973, same number for WhatsApp. You can text 84850 or ask Alexa to send a comment to LBC and write that question as a comment and we'll get it. The time on LBC, 8:15.
This is LBC. Cross Question on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
So Virat in Ealing has texted this question in. If we accept that the welfare bill is too big, how should it be reduced? Andrew Rosindell.
So you can only reduce the welfare bill once you give people incentive to go back to work and come off benefits. If benefits are so generous that it's easier to stay at home and claim benefits, and there's no real incentive to go back to work, you're never going to solve the problem. So you do need, I'm afraid, in certain cases, to be quite tough with some people, because there are a lot of people in this country, and there's people that come to this country as well, who finish up on long-term benefits, which the country simply cannot afford. So we have to get people back to work one way or the other, and Labour is now having to deal with this serious problem. We tried to deal with it. Perhaps we didn't succeed as much as we should have done. But every government, whoever's in power, is going to face the same problem. We cannot be a nation that lives off benefits. We have to be a nation that works, gets up in the morning and builds a strong nation. And if people are incentivised not to work because the benefits are so generous, then the system is failing.
Zoe Garbett.
I really reject the frame that anyone is just at home and on benefits and there's not work that they want to do. I think this framing that disabled people are exploiting the system is really unpleasant and really unhelpful. I think that there's, we've got experts saying that there's not even the accessible jobs for lots of people to do. We've got people at home that are being talked about that need assistance to dress themselves, get exhausted. We've got people on long COVID who have tried to get back to work. If you talk to people who would love to work, but they just can't because they get so exhausted.
But to get to Virat's question, if we accept that the welfare bill is too big, so you don't accept that the welfare bill is too big?
I think it needs to be reformed, and we'd push for, so the Greens are really supportive of a universal basic income and a completely different way of funding and supporting people to participate in society.
Where's the money coming from?
Well, I'd tax the rich.
Oh, you tax the rich,
I think we need to close loopholes around
Half of them are leaving already because we're being taxed too far.
That's an absolute myth that people will leave. And you've got the...
If you want to bankrupt the country even further, adopt the Green Party policy.
I'd rather a few millionaires left and we kept our disabled people alive.
I'd rather trap the millionaires in and they can pay for public services.
Zoe, do you really believe that the amount of disability in the nation has doubled in the past few years? Do you think that's totally credible?
As in from the stats that you were just talking about?
Yes.
But I think that shows that we've got a very sick nation. Like, if you think that people were being provided with... it'd be interesting. I was going to ask when you were talking, like, for me, what I heard is that people need health support because they now are unwell. We've got a very sick nation. We've got high poverty. We've got people unable to, we've got cost of living crisis. Like, people are sick. We've got chronic conditions and people need health and support. And we need a proper health system that's able to support them, a social care system. We need our children to have proper SEND provision. Like, it's all about giving people the right system. People are disabled because they don't get access to the right system. That's a social model of disability.
You still don't answer funding all this. It's a huge shopping list of costs here. Where's the money coming from? You have to have wealth to spend on public services. If you don't have the wealth, if you haven't got the wealth creators generating the income and the investment for the country, I'm sorry, you won't have the money to spend all the things that you want to spend the money on. And your party's policies will be a calamity.
Let me get back.
A very poor country.
Let me get back to John Pearce, because I think what Virat is getting at in this question, if we accept that the welfare bill is too big, how should it be reduced, is that what you're doing to reduce it is not the right thing, that there are a whole raft of other choices you could have made as a government, and why are you choosing specifically to go after the disabled?
I certainly reject that premise, because what we are actually doing is doing both the review of the benefit system to make sure it works for people and it helps them into work, so those that can work, are able to work, but also we're reforming the way the employment world of work works. I sat on the Employment Rights Bill committee, the changes there. Lots of our work over the last 15 years has become very insecure and poorly paid. So increases in the national minimum wage so that work actually pays, so that there's the incentive to go to work. Then much more secure work, so ending fire and rehire, ending exploitative 0 hours contracts, day one rights for mums and dads, making work better and more supportive and more secure and pay better is fundamentally what we're doing on on the other side of this coin to make sure that people feel that they can, that, you know, there are opportunities for everyone. And one of the things that we're doing is Charlie Mayfield is doing a review for us of how to keep Britain working. So how can we improve the recruitment and retention of disabled people in the workplace? Again, look, as a former employment lawyer, you know, I know the challenges that lots of disabled people face in the workplace. How do we make those reasonable adjustments affordable? How do we support people better to stay in work? Now, if we change the world of work and we make it more sustainable, then actually, you know, this, you know, Andrew's approach would certainly be mainly stick. Like ours is very much is provide that ceiling, so we target it at the most in need, and then provide the workplace that people can actually feel they can move into.
You're arguing more carrot-based from Labour. Let's go to the phone lines for our next call. Shuvik is in Eltham. Good evening, Shuvik.
Hello, Simon. Yes, I welcome the Magnitsky reforms. For example, ending the wealth visa. The London housing market still needs to be properly reformed. Does the panel believe in wealth taxes, reforming wealth taxes to pay for social care? For example, taxing equity funds properly.
Okay, Phoebe.
No, I don't believe in wealth taxes in order to fund things like that. I think we've already seen quite a number of high net worth individuals leaving the UK. And I think that is unfortunately impoverishing us. And to levy a wealth tax, even a one-off wealth tax, which is an idea that's sort of been battered around by people like Gary Stevenson, is a really bad idea. I do think that social care reform is extremely important and extremely difficult to get right. I don't think that taxing the people who contribute most in revenue is a good idea, though.
I'm going to guess that you don't think it's a bad idea.
I think it's a great idea. Yeah, I think so. The Green Party actually talk about 2% tax on people with £10 million assets or more, and that kind of wealth tax is supported by the patriotic millionaires. So there are millionaires that do want to pay more tax because they know that contributing to a strong society is good for everybody. So, yeah, I'd really support us looking at wealth taxes. I think that people with the broadest shoulders should be contributing more, and then we can use those funds to, fund social care on the NHS so that our societies are healthier and stronger.
Andrew Rosindell, we can rely on patriotic millionaires to help us pay for social care.
Well, of course, they don't need to be taxed to pay it. If they want to give voluntary contributions over and above what they're paying, give us the names and addresses. In fact, give Rachel Reeves their names and addresses. I'm sure they'll give a hefty donation. But the reality is, if you clobber the people that create the wealth, they'll leave or they'll find ways around the system. Or you'll destroy potential businesses and enterprise that want to create that wealth. We should have learned this lesson a long time ago. If you want to create wealth to spend on public services, high taxes doesn't work. Now, when Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister, she reduced taxes, but the tax take increased. So we finished up spending more money on public services because the economy was stronger. We're going in the opposite direction now. We're taxing everybody to the hilt, which means actually the tax take will be reduced, as is now happening, which is why Rachel Reeves's calculations are all going out of sync in terms of what she thought would happen. So this is totally the wrong policy, and it will lead to a much poorer country and less money for the disabled and the public services that we all want to see.
John Pearce, in the last hour of the programme, we had callers and listeners texting in saying the government should, instead of going after the welfare cuts, should be taxing the rich. What Shuvik is asking is whether the government shouldn't consider using wealth taxes to fund adult social care, to which you say...
Well, my concern is that as a country, we inherited the highest tax burden since the Second World War from the Conservatives. I think the way that we actually will get our funding for our public services is through growth and is through what we've seen in the spending review, which is investment in infrastructure, improving our productivity. That's ultimately the way that we are, have to as a country. We can't tax our way out of it. We can't continue to borrow our way out of it for day-to-day spending. So we have to invest in infrastructure in this country, improve our productivity, support families to work, because unless people are having that, and so things like, for example, the free breakfast clubs that we've introduced.
But what's the argument against taxing the wealthy in order to pay for adult social care?
Well, I would argue that, we absolutely agree that those with the broadest shoulders should pay the most. I don't think there's any argument there. I do think that, I actually do agree with Andrew that you reach a point where actually you will lose the wealth investors in this country. So you have to get the balance right. We have seen increases on, the wealthy. For example, on private schools, we've introduced VAT. That's the top 7% in the country who are going to private schools. We've taken that money and we're investing it in the 93% of state children to improve the education for them. So we are doing it, but we're doing it in a targeted way. But ultimately, this isn't about, taxing our way out. We have to improve our economy and get people back working.
Zoe?
I was just going to add that New York City has implemented wealth taxes and didn't see that impact. They haven't seen the millionaires leaving, and it hasn't had the impact. So it'd be interesting to hear where that has happened, because I think that the net gain of taxing wealth and closing the loopholes, around the unfair tax system, capital gains tax and other things, I think is what we should be looking at, and not going after people who are disabled and need funding to rely on services that enable them to live their lives.
And since the subject of patriotism has come up, Andrew, I wanted to ask you, because we've got you here tonight, and take advantage of the opportunity to ask you about your Promoting Patriotism campaign, which I believe now has involved an initiative that you are promoting to get flags flying at public buildings.
Well, hang on. I had a debate today in Parliament. My campaign is to have sensible flag flying policies, because we're seeing a whole range of different flags being flown from public buildings, which are not private property. And I think we need to get back to sensible policy on which flags we fly and what days we fly them, rather than having this explosion of different flags for every cause, every lobby group, every minority organisation. You can't go down that road.
So what flags meet the Rosindell mark?
Well, national flags, for a start. The Union Jack should always take precedence over all flags, because it's our national flag. And guess what? It represents everybody. It doesn't divide people up by different groups. This isn't an identity type of flag, because it identifies with everybody. Of course, there are country flags. In Scotland, we have the Scottish Saltire, we have the Cross of St George. County flags are very popular. They represent everybody as well. And then there are special national occasions, such as Armed Forces Day. I went to the ceremony in my town hall this week, and there are other special days like Commonwealth Day. So there are things where we should fly those flags, royal occasions, of course.
Pride?
So I don't believe in identity politics.
Pride?
I don't believe in any type of identity flag, because if you fly one, you have to fly every single potential group that might have a flag. You can't say we're going to fly for that group but not the other group. So we need to get back to being sensible. And by the way, you mentioned the particular pride flag. There are dozens and dozens of different types of pride flags available now. So what one would you fly? I'm absolutely bemused by the amount of flags that we could potentially fly. But councils simply shouldn't be wasting their time on these arguments.
Okay.
Let's focus on keeping the streets clean and providing public services. The Union Jack is good enough.
All right, let me briefly see what the other panellists think of that. John Pearce?
I just don't think that this is something that the national government should be dictating. I think it's up to local councils to decide what flag they're going to fly. I think, I'm very proud to see the Ukrainian flag flying on many public buildings at the moment. We have to be supporting Ukraine. If you start regulating and a war comes along and one of our allies needs our support, or there's a terrorist incident, I don't want us having to change regulations to make sure that we can show support. I think it's a local council. Less regulation is better.
Phoebe?
I do think that perhaps the thing to do here is to encourage local councils to have guidance. So I can imagine if you're like the flag person at a council and you constantly have people coming up to you being like, could you put my flag on the flagpole too? That's quite difficult and irritating. maybe some guidance. Maybe we can put together some standard national guidance that people can use. I'm also not sure it's enough.
That's precisely what I'm actually proposing.
Oh, great.
We need sensible guidance. I'm not saying government can impose it on a town hall because they are elected, so they make the decisions. But if I can just quickly come back on the Ukraine flag, John, I am not against where there's a national disaster in a particular friendly country or there's a war of some kind. I was very in favour of flying the Israeli flag after October the 7th. I'm in favour of flying the Ukraine flag. The issue is how long do you keep it up? That's the issue. You can't keep foreign flags up forever. You have to have a certain cut-off point. It's a bit like when someone dies, you do it half-mast. They don't stay up forever. At some point it comes down. So there needs to be sensible guidelines on these things. That's all I'm arguing for.
And so briefly, is this an issue on which the Green Party takes a position?
Well, Greens in their town halls have definitely done what John was describing, worked with their local communities to make sure that people feel represented, celebrated, safe. You know, people like Gypsy Roma Traveller community, so we're celebrating their month of history. And I think it is really important and definitely you need to listen to everybody and make sure you're representing everyone through those flags.
OK, lots more questions to come. In a moment, we're going to talk about defence spending on Cross Question. The time now, 28 minutes to 9, and the news headlines come from Daryl Jackson.
Prosecutors say a man who murdered a 14-year-old boy with a samurai sword in Hainault in East London was trying to kill as many people as he could. 37-year-old Marcus Monzo carried out a 20-minute rampage last April, killing Daniel Angerin and injuring 5 others, including 2 police officers. President Trump says tremendous things were achieved at the NATO summit. Allies, including the UK, committed to spend 5% of their GDP on defence. Sir Keir Starmer insists a vote on his welfare reforms will go ahead next week. That's despite a possible huge rebellion among Labour MPs. LBC weather showers spreading into western areas this evening. Dry elsewhere, but feeling warm and humid and a low of 13 degrees.
Cross Question on LBC.
And joining me around the Cross Question table tonight, John Pearce, the Labour MP for High Peak, Andrew Rosindell, the Conservative Member of Parliament for Romford, Zoe Garbett, Green Party Member of the London Assembly. She was the party's candidate for Mayor at the last election, and Phoebe Arslanagić-Little, a political commentator heading social policy for the Onward think tank. Our next question comes from Tim in Mansfield, who has texted in to say that he has a 19-year-old son in the armed forces. And his question is whether the pledge to spend 5% of GDP on defence by the year 2035 is too little, too late, and will we regret not setting a much earlier deadline? Phoebe Arslanagić-Little, let's start with you.
I am quite worried that we have been, in general, not spending enough on defence. I was speaking with a defence expert today about the decision to buy the F-35As, and he said to me, these are great. You know, this is a nice piece of kit to have. But actually, we don't even have any anti-aircraft defences around our bases in the UK. You know, we can't stop protesters with a can of paint from climbing over a fence and damaging really expensive planes. And we actually really are not prepared for something like the drone attack, that brilliant drone attack that Ukraine launched against Russia. So I am worried that we have been seriously underspending, and there's going to be some kind of terrible event coming up.
So do you think this is too little, too late?
I don't think it's too late. I think it has been too little, and I'm glad we've made the commitment.
John Pearce, it's a long way off 2035.
Well, I think the first thing to say is that we are committed to 2.5%, which is what we said we would do in our manifesto. And, the step change that we're seeing under this government in terms of investing in our defence and security is in marked contrast to the last Conservative government, who absolutely hollowed out our armed forces. We live now in a very insecure, unstable world. I think it's fantastic that we are taking a lead. I think it's vital that we take a lead, and actually, the investment is also good for our economy. Phoebe mentions the F-35As. That investment is going to see 20,000 new jobs in this country. This is actually a really positive thing for our economy in terms of that investment, but also it's vital for our security.
Sorry, Garbett.
I'm concerned that the doubling of the arms spending commitment that came out of the NATO summit. NATO's meant to be our. We're sold. It's our place for peace and security. And I think pushing this doubling of the arms spending at the cost of things like international aid and public services. So I'm interested, John, with what you said there about the job creation, because my understanding is that these fighter jets are going to be carrying US bombs and be US owned. So it's interesting to understand that dynamic around, how these fit into our plans. We're also one of the initial signatories of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. So I just don't understand how all these bits add up.
Andrew Rosindell.
So we have been spending not enough on defence for a very long time. In fact, if you look back to the time of the Cold War, we fooled ourselves into believing we could now have this great peace dividend, if you remember that. Well, that was a mistake. We should have continued maintaining our armed forces. We should have continued investing in defence. Because we didn't, and because we've been complacent all these years, now we've got major issues in the world, and defence is very important. Without a strong defence, our freedom is at risk. So we've been very foolish, in my view, and he may not be very popular amongst members of this panel, but the truth is, if it wasn't for President Trump, most of these European countries wouldn't be spending all this money on defence that they're being made to spend now. He has come down on them very strongly, and they now realise they've got to start paying their way, which they weren't doing for a very, very long time. So countries like Germany, which have been hiding behind their historical mistakes by not spending money on defence, and now having to stump up the cash, and rightly so. All countries in Europe should be paying their way. All countries in Europe, except Switzerland, because they have a reason not to be, should be part of NATO and contributing. So I want to know when Ireland is going to join NATO and when they're going to pay for defence as well, because they're currently shielding under the British umbrella. So it's no good. If we care about this country's freedom, we have to have strong armed forces and strong defence, and we have to build a strong NATO again.
Well, we have a follow-up question, which Andrew has managed already to answer, but it comes from Michael in Rains Park, who asks, has President Trump, also known as Daddy, which of course is what Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary-General, jokingly referred to him as today, has President Trump received enough credit for getting the vast majority of NATO members to sign up to 5% of GDP on defence, thus keeping all of us in Europe safer? Maybe if NATO had listened to him during his first term, the world would be much safer than it is today. I think Andrew's already answered the question. John Pearce, does Donald Trump deserve some credit for forcing this issue?
Well, I mean, Andrew's entirely right that we were, for a very long time, well, not entirely, but majority-wise, reliant on the USA. What Donald Trump has obviously done is make a very strong case for why we need our own independent defence and security. I think actually one of the most important drivers has obviously been Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine and the threat once again on European soil. That is the driver for all of the NATO states, and to see our Prime Minister taking such a lead in NATO and in taking so seriously our defence and security and the commitment of the Chancellor to spend this money to get us into a place where we are in a better place to defend ourselves is hugely important.
And while we are on this topic, I mean, I know that you are a leading member of Labour Friends of Israel within Parliament. Donald Trump yesterday, in that scatological exchange with reporters at the White House, suggested for a while that neither Israel or Iran knew what they were doing. They don't know what they're doing. Are we now led to believe that Israel does know what it's doing?
I mean, look, again, the situation in terms of getting a ceasefire with Iran, and I will give Donald Trump a huge amount of credit for the fact that he took the action to stop the threat of Iran's nuclear capability. It was hugely important. In the UK, Iran are a huge threat to our national security. We have seen terrorist threats. We've seen over 20 that we know about. We've seen recent arrests in the last few weeks of Iranians attempting to organise terror plots. Iran are sponsoring the Houthis, Hamas, Hezbollah, completely disabling and disrupting the Middle East. They are a huge threat, and they absolutely can never be allowed to get a nuclear capability. So the fact that we are now in a ceasefire, if President Trump can move forward and get a deal which means that Iran never gets a nuclear weapon, he will have all the credit in the world from me.
Phoebe Arslanagić-Little, let me get back to this question about 5% of GDP spending that Donald Trump has demanded, and NATO today has crossed that Rubicon and said, yes, we'll do it. I mean, does he deserve untrammeled credit for it, especially given the fact that his ultimate plan, of course, is basically to leave Europe to look after its own defences so the United States can reposition itself and focus on the Asia-Pacific region instead?
Yeah, I mean, it can be hard to give a man who is, to my mind anyway, so fundamentally unpleasant and unlikable credit, but he clearly does deserve it. We have been much too reliant on US power, much too subject actually to the caprice of different American presidents, because we have been underspending on defence for so long. We needed to learn to stand on our own 2 feet, and that is the process that's happening now. It's painful, it's expensive, but it's what we need to do to maintain our security.
Zoe Garbett, any credit for Donald Trump?
No credit for Donald Trump from me at all. I think he compared the US strikes of Iran to the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in a really casual way, and I think he's a huge threat to world peace. I also think that nuclear weapons are not what we need to keep us safe. They heighten risk of escalation and really heighten mistrust between countries. And also, looking at what's been happening in the last couple of weeks, we heard John Brennan, the ex-CIA director, saying that there was no intelligence that Iran had started up its nuclear weapon program that was suspended in 2023. So I think we need to look at this in the round and also talk about the fact that Israel is continuing to take part in a genocide against the people of Palestine, and the UK is completely complicit in that through our arms sales, sharing intelligence. And I just think we need to be able to look at this in the round and remember that there is a genocide happening in Palestine.
But on the 5% issue, at a time of international instability, where it is perfectly possible to imagine a series of circumstances in which Vladimir Putin does not stop with Ukraine, does not get satisfied sufficiently with Ukraine, whatever you think of Donald Trump and all of the whole persona, the fact that he's got NATO members to sign up to 5% of GDP on defence has to make the continent safer, doesn't it?
I think, it depends if you think that just investing in arms is the way forward to world peace if that's our ultimate aim, and I don't think it is. I think there's other things we should be doing. There's no conversations here about negotiations and peaceful, bringing people together to have peaceful discussions. We've seen that happen in the Troubles in Ireland. We saw that happen in apartheid South Africa, and I think it's getting back to those principles and just moving away from this just constant investment in arms.
Andrew Rosindell, I'll let you have one more bite of the cherry.
Well, I'd be interested to see how Zoe would get on with the Ayatollah and the Iranian regime after the terrible atrocities they're committing and the threats they're posing against their neighbours and, of course, the West. Equally so, I don't know how you get on with Mr. Putin and whether you can solve that one by appeasement. And we've got China too, and they're also a bigger threat, and global terrorism we're seeing. The idea that we are just going to be left unprotected and hope they'll come and talk to us nicely and we can all solve it in a nice way. I'd love to see that happen, as we all would. But the reality of the world we're living in is that doesn't happen. You need to have defence if you want peace. If you don't have defence and you go for a policy of appeasement, which clearly is what the Greens are doing, I have to tell you that history shows that it ends in calamity. We need peace through strength, and that is what Conservative governments have done. That's what all Labour governments have done. I don't honestly believe the vast majority of British people believe we should disarm, which is effectively what you're saying.
Very briefly, are you appeasing?
I think I'm talking about our general strategy around defence. Like, we don't support Trident. We don't support, like I said earlier, we signed up to the abolishing nuclear weapons in 1970, and all 5 countries that were part of that initial abolition of nuclear weapons treaty, no one has made any progress in getting rid of them. We've actually gone too far the other way, and I just think it's a terrifying time, and I think we need to look at all solutions.